All right, so today we have the privilege of talking to Rodger Cunningham. Rodger's a fascinating guy. I'll just run through a few things that he's done. He's an award-winning musician. He's a film and television producer and composer in New Zealand. He's of Maori descent on his mother's side and Scottish on his father's side. He's been in the creative and education industries for 25 years. He's had 5 different career changes and transitions. And he's really an amazing guy. He's fascinating to listen to. We're really happy to have Rodger here. He's been through a lot. He's had a lot of success, and I really think he's someone that you're going to get a lot of value out of listening to. So Rodger, take it away. Tell us about your story. Feel free to start wherever you want to.
Thank you, Russ. That's right. My mother is Maori. She's indigenous to the country of New Zealand. And for those of your listeners in the podcast who don't know a lot about New Zealand is a small little country, the most southern islands on the planet. You go any further south than New Zealand, you're going to hit the Antarctic. And New Zealand was first discovered by the Maori people in around the 1300s. They were an incredible race of navigators. If you can imagine the kind of traveling that happened back in those days, the South Pacific Polynesian islanders were traveling in the deep blue oceans hundreds of years before the rest of the world had figured that out. And I guess the British, when the only way that they actually figured out how to navigate the deep waters to any level of accuracy was when John Harrison invented the clock back in, I want to say, the 1800s. Up until then, it was a little hit and miss, whereas the Polynesian tribes, they had different mechanisms for navigating, and there were things like the stars, the currents, the marine life, the wind changes, and it was like catching an Uber back in those days to go from Fiji to Samoa to Tahiti to New Zealand. They'd figured that stuff out. And then we were colonized by the British in the late 1700s, 1800s, and things completely changed for these people. My mother's first language is Maori, and she married a full-blooded Scotsman. And his name is Rodger Cunningham. And I talked to my dad sometimes. I said, and Dad and I, we do talk, "Hey, Dar, how's your day going, eh? Ugh, it's not bad, Rodger, how you doing?" And where my mother spoke completely differently. My mother had a very mellifluous way, like she spoke in rhythm and she spoke in song almost. So if I'd say, "Hey, Mum, how are you doing?" She'd go, "Oh, well, today, I'm feeling quite good." And you'd tell how she was feeling by the way that she was talking. How these two got on, I to this day, I never know. They were just chalk and cheese, my mother and father. And anyway, so growing up, I grew up in Scotland for a little while, and but spent most of my years in New Zealand. And I guess probably a good time to talk about my introduction into what I eventually got into, which was music and film. I was academically challenged, to be honest. These days they might have called it ADHD. I'm not sure it was quite that. I was just a little dreamer. Just to sit in my little world and dream and imagine, and things like doing your homework just didn't have any motivation for me to do that. But in New Zealand, especially amongst the Maori people, the first thing that you do with little children is you figure out what they're gifted at, because honestly, you've heard speakers like Tony Robbins and various other guys go, "How do you know what your passion is?" It was a very, very good question. And one of the techniques to figure that out is to, well, what were you good at when you were very little, before you knew much? And so the Maori people would go, oh, well, this boy's an orator. He's quite creative. He dreams a little bit. So therefore, we give him opportunities to speak and perform, which is what I used to do a lot when I was little. We would have school assemblies, and the speaker of the day wouldn't turn up, and they'd say, oh gosh, what are we going to do for the next 20 minutes? Rodger, get on stage and sing a song. Rodger, get on stage and tell a story. I'm 7, 8, 9 years old, that sort of thing. And no one sort of went, yeah, well, that's what he does. He gets up and entertains and does stuff. And it was all quite natural. And so that's kind of a truncated story of my upbringing.
That's great. So you had this musical background growing up, and at what point did you decide, not necessarily the people around you, but you decide that you wanted to be a musician and get into that world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I always wanted to be a musician, since I can remember. And the problem was that A, we couldn't really afford it, and B, my dear dad, who's still alive today at 89 years old, he didn't like noise, and so I didn't start to become musical until my late teens, 17, and I had to make up for lost time. It's much, much better to learn an instrument, when you're young. It's a little more difficult, but I did make up for lost time, and I had my very first guitar lesson, Russ, and the guy was of quite some renown. Wayne Cornwall, good friend of mine today, and after my first lesson, he said, "Oh my God, you're the first Maori I've ever met that doesn't have a natural sense of rhythm. You should probably think about doing something else." And that was the motivation. You remember that teacher that told you couldn't do it? And that was the motivation. I said, I spent the next 3 years, 6 hours a day. And I didn't actually have a natural talent for music, but I was going to prove him wrong. And one day I met him, years later, and I said, "Hey, well, how about this piece? And how about that piece?" Gosh, it's the challenge that he laid down, that you shouldn't do it, was the motivation for me to go and do it.
So what was the first career that you had? Was it just side gigs, or was there a job at a company that you had, or how did you get into the music industry?
I started off playing in bands, but back in those days, as a musician in New Zealand, there wasn't really a career path. Very, very few made it. We didn't have the population, and B, we were bombarded with American and British music. Absolutely bombarded with American and British music, and so anything that we came up with just seemed like such a second cousin to it all. We just all went, good job, but not quite how the Americans do it, and not quite how the British do it. And so I kept my day job, which was I trained as a radio communications technician, and I think maybe for 5 years I did that. And when I got to my 5th year, I went, this is not going to be my life, working in this field at all. I just didn't see any. I guess there was a career path there for me, and I could have made money, but it just didn't seem fulfilling. So I got my qualification, I got my diploma, and shortly afterwards quit, and went. Decided that I wanted to follow music, and as life happens, because I had this qualification, I I was taken on as one of the technicians in a radio station. That really was the beginning of my introduction into music, because I learned how to record music and learned how to broadcast music. So that's my start.
Rodger, what would you say your musical style was of your band back in the day?
Probably heavy rock. For some reason, when you learned to play guitar back then, you wanted to be Eddie Van Halen. You wanted to be Angus Young from AC/DC. You wanted to be Steve Vai. Remember that guy? And you wanted to be, so my introduction to music was I was learning to play all of these heavy rock type that genre. But wasn't too long after that I gave up the electric guitar for 15 years and concentrated on acoustic guitar. And that's why I got these big long nails, because I now play much more flamenco, classical, folk music. I just find that so rewarding. It's a great genre to tell stories, with to tell your stories. And just very quickly, I wrote a song a number of years ago where I was being shafted by a lawyer over a certain case, and I was absolutely being shafted. The justice system and the legal system, even though I was 100% should have won this case, the justice system being the way it was and the way that those things go, this lawyer had me all over a barrel. And I said to the lawyer, I rang him and said, "Hey, listen, man, you have a conflict of interest in this case. You really should excuse yourself from the case and let another lawyer take it." And he all but laughed at me and said, "Yeah, see you in court." So I went to a better lawyer, and I said to her, "Listen, these are the circumstances around this case, and I'm clearly being shafted by the legal system, because this guy should never be representing on the other side." And she all but grabbed me by the cheeks, and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm the best lawyer that you could have asked, but you're going to lose, and I'm not going to represent you. I just won't take your money, turn up in court, and lose gracefully." I woke up that night in the middle of the night, and I said to myself, how is that possible? That justice isn't going to happen just because there's this loophole, or there's these little secrets that lawyers can get away with. So I wrote a song that night. It's quite a nasty little song, but and I recorded it, and I sent it to the entire law firm that he was working for. And I said, "You get this lawyer off this case, or I'm going to busk this song outside your law firm every day and invite the news." I had nothing else. And just quickly, the lyrics go a little bit like this. It's to the tune of a kind of like a bar mitzvah song, like some sort of boom, like polka, It goes, "I hate crooked lawyers. They eat children for breakfast. They dress like Pharisees, and their souls are always restless. To crush the sick and lame, shift the guilt and blame. They belong at the bottom of the sea. Beneath their fancy clothes are dirty, rotten bones, and they're eager to defile all purity. Hilltop homes, fancy cars, drinking buddies at the bars. They belong at the bottom of the sea." One more verse. And this is what he said to me. "Well, there's a law for you, and there's a law for me, and God himself ordained this to be so. So you should be afraid, 'cause I am getting paid. Excuse me, I've got a case to throw." and I'm playing the guitar, and anyway, cut a long story short, they must have had a kind of one of those, we need to have a closed door meeting about this, and they dropped the case. So, the song is so venomous yet almost Disney childlike that it could have been catchy, Forever that song was going to be representative of this stupid law firm. And it's one of the things that I love about music is that you've always got a song, always got a song, always got, doesn't matter how, we think about American music and particularly blues. They always had a song.
This podcast is about transitions and dealing with them, either successfully or unsuccessfully. I think we can learn from both the good and the bad. The fact that you just shared an experience that can be very challenging for a lot of people, dealing with lawyers, going up against what can seem insurmountable at times. You
Right.
solved that through music. And so is that something you tend to do? Like if you run into a challenge in your life, maybe it's mentally you're stuck somewhere, emotionally you're stuck somewhere. Do you tend to find your way through those or navigate through those situations using music? I just thought it was interesting how you used music to get out of that.
That's probably a really good way to put it, Russ. And music has probably been the only constant in my life. They say that the only constant is change. But wherever I've been in the world and whatever I've done, the guitar which is my main instrument, is always very honest with me. However I'm feeling is going to come out on the guitar, actually. If I'm feeling frustrated and anxious, I'll play frustrated and anxiously. And it's nice to hear yourself play that back. And if I'm feeling happy, and if the muses come and I get creative, that happens. So I guess yes, music is very, 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 very important to me. Having said that, there is this time as a musician, guys, that you're gonna suck for a while, a long time. If you're if your goal is to be a triple jump specialist or a high jumper or a track and field runner, you're not going to turn up first day and win the race. You're going to have to do the hard yards, and music is very much the same. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll go, yeah. The problem that I've had is having this incredibly healthy, vibrant, self-clobbering machine. It's before I perform or before I go into a project, I hear this voice coming. Who do you think you are? You can't do that. Remember yesterday you broke your nail and the song sucked. Everything you do, everything you do sucks. And that voice, and I've learned over the years to ignore it, and I've learned over the years to say, "Oh, hello. I was wondering when you were going to turn up. Oh, there you are. Okay. Oh gosh, I thought I'd lost you there." And it's a way to get through it. Imagine standing up, going on stage, and there's 30,000 people, which wasn't common, but it wasn't uncommon that I would perform in front of thousands of people, and this guy turns up, man, like a blimmin', like you set your alarm clock to him just before you get on stage, and actually the day before, the week before, so you learn to deal with the crippling nature that could do if you listen to it too much, and it's I want to say, as you get a little bit older, and you go and you recognize it, and you have, I guess, a few more tools. And I've been very fortunate because I was thrown on stage at a very early age, so I was familiar with that anxiety, and I was familiar with that fear. I was familiar with what if I suck. I was familiar with what if I embarrass myself, and yeah, I was a little bit lucky in that regard.
Hey, Roger, it sounded like you had a teacher that was pretty honest with you early on. Where do you think that negative voice or that, um, where do you think that came from? Is that something that you experience outside of music, or is it just in music? I mean, obviously, something that you're super passionate about. If you're willing to do something 6 hours a day when you're learning, obviously there's passion there. But why would there be a negative voice? And do you
Hmm.
think there's a source or a reason behind it?
Gosh, you guys just cut right to the heart of the matter, don't you? That is, I, it's, okay. Uh, my one comes, uh, it comes from a number of places, and one of the places that it comes from is intergenerational tragedy. Um, if you can imagine that your great grandfather was dispossessed from his lands and became absolutely poor, your great 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 grandfather even became dispossessed in his own land, lost everything, and then you just become this culture within a country that you used to know and love, and it was my land. And through my mother's line, I think that intergenerational trauma somehow comes through your DNA. My father being Scottish, they had their problems with the English too. Hey, go America back in establishing the Constitution to separate yourselves from the Brits. And so some of it is intergenerational, and some of it to a lesser degree is just most of us are insecure.
Well, that's heavy on the especially the intergenerational. That's not something that I understand well. But I appreciate you sharing that, because that definitely is part of any native culture that has been or has had their lands dispossessed,
Mm,
and you're trying to find your voice and find where you fit in the world now. Um,
mm,
and so
mm,
that was pretty heavy, but I appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, I think most of us are pretty insecure. I know for me, what I was passionate about was playing volleyball. And it wasn't until I had a couple of very serious injuries before I even started to doubt myself. And then it's just like, those voices get louder and louder, like, hey, this guy's better. You're never going to make it. Give up
mm,
before you get yourself too far out there. And that's actually the reason why, Russ and I decided on this podcast was those things that we were most passionate about can, uh, once we extend ourselves too far emotionally, become something that we start to hate. So,
mm,
has there been any time where music has just felt like this anchor that is pulling you down? I mean, you've mentioned that this is something that where you find your expression or you find your
mm.
voice, but has it ever felt like an anchor that's pulling you down and you just can't find your way out?
Yeah, Mac, I can't describe the amount of times that I really wanted to quit. so many times. The thing about music, and I could imagine as an athlete performing at a top level, when something happens and you no longer can perform at that top level. Um, Whereas with a musician, as you create music and a little bit of your soul's in it, and you let them out like little children into the world, and you hope they grow legs and that you hope they run around and do great things. But for every 100 tunes I've written, 70 of them sucked, and the feedback, yeah, not bad. Oh god, we have an off day, or I didn't like the way you played that third note, and if you listen to that stuff too much, you start to doubt. God, am I actually an imposter? Am I one of these people that just thinks he can play guitar, but I'm actually just an imposter? And all those things go through your head. And so the answer to your question, Mac, is absolutely. And I don't know what, I think there's a little something deep down inside that goes, this is going to come with the territory. And, I don't want to say man up about it or harden up about it or get over it, but there is a little bit of all of those things. And I've had very, very good, I've played with some of the best musicians on the planet, to be honest. And what's been very comforting is this is not unusual. This is very, very common, and it's nice to talk to these guys who you consider as taller trees in the forest, who are just going, "Oh, you got that one, yeah, all right, it's gonna happen, mate. Keep going, keep going." And one other thing, Mac, which is really important, is the difference between being a musician and an athlete. Is that I can still be doing this when I'm 90. Not to diminish true athletes who are inspirational and just incredible, but I only kind of need these things to be happening a little bit, these fingers, and have an idea about some music, and so it's a lifelong commitment.
So you mentioned just now that an athlete's probably not going to be playing volleyball at a high level at 90 years old, and I totally agree with that. Mac might be an exception. He has superior genetics and doesn't seem to get hurt very often. The first podcast episode that we did was with someone named Annette Brower, and she has a condition called task-specific focal dysphonia. And what that affects is only her left hand when she's playing the violin. She was a professional violinist. And so she can't play the violin anymore, which was her passion. That was her life, was playing the violin. And so in that episode, it was really interesting to talk to her about the transition going from professional violinist to not a professional violinist. And her whole identity was wrapped up in the fact that she was a violinist. And so to your point just now, yes, and I hope you are 90 years old still singing and playing the guitar, but what if, how would you deal with it, do you think, if all of a sudden you woke up one day and you couldn't speak or sing anymore? Or maybe you have a condition like Annette where your hands just don't work anymore. How do you think you would get through that? How would you deal with that, do you think?
Ooh, that's a tough question. It reminds me of a question that is asked every now and then. Would you rather lose your eyesight or your hearing? And I guess for me, I'd probably rather lose my eyesight, because my hearing is, has been for the longest time my bread and butter. Although I have to say, as years are traveling on, all my senses are fading, Russ. Oh my goodness. I used to be able to hear just really intricate and very intricate spectral frequencies, and it's a natural thing, as you get a little bit older, things start to wear out. But if I woke up tomorrow and actually remind me of a story with a friend and I, when I went through my rebellious teenage years, Ross, and I was rebellious, man. You know, going as far as to kind of not cross the law, but getting as close as you can to, and like riding motorbikes and going as quickly as you could, to have that feeling of a general rush. And my friend and I, we were on a GPZ 600. I think we were traveling around, what did I say, about 100 miles an hour, coming into a kind of a chicane, and he hit a false neutral. So coming into this corner, he needed maximum braking, maximum front brake, maximum rear brake, and maximum engine brake to hit that corner at the right speed. And he was coming down, ding, 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 and he hit a false neutral. And so we were going into this corner without that engine braking, and I was a passenger on the back, and I'm holding on for dear life. And I just knew in the next 5 or 10 seconds, things could get pretty bad. And I just went, well, I curled my hands up like this, and when if we come off, I want these things to keep working. If I'm tetraplegic, quadriplegic, lose limbs and stuff, I just want my hands to be able to function. So a long-winded way of saying I really don't know how I would cope. I don't know. But better musicians than me have coped. There's a guy by the name of Jason Brecker. I'm not sure that you would know him, but back in the 80s, he was hailed as this prodigy of absolute geniusness as a guitar of our age, better than the Eddie Van Halens, and better than the Angus Youngs, and better than these the Eric Claptons and all those guys. And he got a motor neural disease, and so he's lived the last 30 years of his life basically creating music with his eyes. I can't even imagine that. Look, so they've got this technology that follows his eyes around, and he creates music that way. And he seems as happy as he found. I guess you get all spiritual in that context of, and he is the envy of all of us guitarists, that this guy can do that. What have we got to complain about?
That's a cool story. I'd never heard that.
Brecker.
Jason Brecker.
Just recently, all of the he's needed a lot of care. He's in a bit of a downward spiral, and we had guitarists coming out of the woodwork selling their guitars and just giving this man the medical attention the expensive medical attention that he needs, because he's been such an inspiration to us.
Hey, Rodger, I want to take a little bit of a step back in our conversation. One of the things we hope from this podcast is to find those people that might be struggling through some challenging times in their lives. What's been your process for getting yourself out of those creative funks, or just where you're in a bad place and you're like, look, I know the way forward is through, and I'm only going to get through. But what helps you to see you through to the other side on a consistent basis? Because it sounds like you hit those bumps every once in a while, and it sounds like you got a process to get through.
I hit those bumps probably more often than I'd care to admit, but I'll admit it on this podcast because of the honesty of this podcast. They happen more often than I care to admit. There's that old saying, when you're going through hell, don't stop. So there's that. There's that. And then there's the other one. There are three major, what would you call them? So we try beings, right? We're emotional, we're physical, and we're spiritual. And then there's that other, holy threesome of faith, hope, and love. And it doesn't need necessarily to be thought about in a religious sense, but um, one one of the things that when things look hopeless and I just don't ever see my way out of it, faith has never worked. When things are being terrible and I'm just gone, I just don't know how this is going to roll. Well, love hasn't worked because you got plenty of loving people that will say you're going to be all right, you're going to be fine, and and then there's got this other thing called hope, and it has a quality. Hope has a quality that never disappoints. If you can, like the best thing you can do for somebody who is suicidal, is try to fan hope into them, because hope, if you believe it as a spiritual quality, hope will never disappoint you. Hope will always turn up when you need it. Faith and love, not sure. I mean, correct me. That's not been my experience, but hope is one of those part of that trinity of these three spiritual qualities that has if I've ever gone right, I don't know what's going to happen here, I hope for a better day, and a better day always comes.
Rodger, on that note, what does hope sound like for you? What is that voice, and how would you encourage somebody? Um, and I love that idea, and that that Trinity. I hadn't heard that explained before, and I love it. But what does that hope sound like? Besides, hey, a better day will come. When somebody's trying to hold on, what does that sound like for you?
Yeah, I kind of, it's one of those things that you probably only want to whisper to people. You don't want to shout it on the mountaintop because it's a quality that I don't understand. It's something that I can't really explain, but it's something. It's almost as simple as I'm just going to hope for a better day, because if I've lost hope, I'm finished. I'm finished. I'm done. If I don't have any hope left in me, I'm done. And it's not even it's not an academic thing. It's not a thing that you can do by good deeds and good works. It's not a thing that you can earn. It's not a thing that you can uh, uh, you know spend weeks and weeks feeding the homeless or something like that. It's actually a quality that is, all I got to do is hope that a better day's going to come. And all the ups and downs that I've been through, scrambling furiously to touch wood, it's always kind of worked out. So that's one of my things. Another one is obviously having a strong network of people that understand you and are close to you. Because what was that character, that American character that you guys grew up with, Mr. Rogers? Is that him?
Mr. Rogers, yeah.
And he says this wonderful line in that movie that Forrest Gump actor
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks played, and he said, "That which is said can be managed. That which is not being said can't be." So if you can articulate your pain and articulate your loss, your lostness, your loss of direction, if you can articulate it as well as you can, then it can be managed. But if it stays in this, wooden block, can't be managed.
You mentioned something just a few seconds ago. You said that having a strong support network around you is important. And I would agree with that. However, we don't always have that at times.
That's true.
And when I was talking to you before this podcast, something you had mentioned is that one of the hardest, if not the hardest transition you've ever had is moving to the United States from
Oh
New
yeah.
Zealand.
Oh yeah.
And so, maybe kind of to wrap things up a little bit here, I'd be really curious if you could just talk about that a little bit and just share what that transition looked like, why it was so hard. Why would you consider that the hardest transition you've had to go through, considering you've had lots of challenges as a musician, changing
Mm.
careers, things like that?
One of the things in New Zealand, I considered myself a big fish in a little pond. And I always knew that I needed to leave and to see what my currency looked like in somewhere like America, you know, or grew up all my life, just seeing the best artists and the best films and the best fashion statements and the best technology. Like America has throughout the years have just been such an inspiration to the rest of the world watching from afar. And so I just felt that the challenge to head to America, see what that looks like. What is that going to look like? And I quickly discovered, actually, no, not quickly, because I'm a slow learner, I discovered that America, it was almost like there's this saying that goes, separated by a common language. The only thing I had in common with Americans is that we speak the same language. Everything else, American, is different to how I think. My thinking process is different. My historical background, my understanding of economics, my understanding of politics, my understanding of how banks work. My gosh, American and your credit system, it just was. That was incredible. Like, okay, so get in debt to get a better credit rating. All right, let's work that out. And and also insincerity. In New Zealand, your word is your word means something. If I say something in New Zealand, say, hey, I can do that, it's going to cost you $300. And, well, then job done. Okay, see you tomorrow, $300. Here it is. And you could get away once or twice with going, actually, I know I said 300, but you actually owe me 1,000 now. And you might get away with it once, you might get away with it twice, but your reputation, then people say, he'll tell you one price one day and then he kind of didn't really mean it, so you can't take him at his word. And so I wanted to come here, and my dream was to write music for a feature film, something that had like $100 million budget. I think I was up for it, and I still do in some ways. And I just came across, and I guess LA is probably not the best example, but I just came across so many disingenuous people that you couldn't take for you just like they'd say to you, hey, love your work, man, hey, call you tomorrow, and tomorrow came and went. Next week, and you'd ring up and say, hey, look, you said you're going to call me tomorrow. Well, it's now next week. Sorry, man, got busy. We'll call you tomorrow. And after about 3 months of that, I began to realize, these guys will just tell you whatever they feel at the time. And they don't care. So I came across that, and that was just a big wake-up call. Gosh, I could tell you story after story of my introduction into America. I want to take responsibility for my own naivety, and I want to take my responsibility for the fact that, there certainly was necessary growth that needed to happen in myself. So I can't blame America. I just think it took me a little bit longer to organize myself, to acclimatize myself.
I think anybody that's had that feeling of being a foreigner, you have your past and you have your way of thinking through everything, and when you land, it's very disorienting that people think differently, even though you've observed them maybe in film or in different ways. It's still just very shocking that someone thinks so differently and behaves so differently. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, it was I take some responsibility for taking a little bit longer than I should have to acclimatize myself a little bit more. My naivety sometimes knows no bounds. I was saying to Russ that sometimes I suffer from what I've self-diagnosed as spiritual Tourette's, and I'll go into a situation and trying to read the room. Back in New Zealand, I can read a room, I can read people, and I can read the situation, and it doesn't really matter. But here was a little bit, I don't think I changed my framework. And so I'd go away from meetings and go, am I speaking a different language? Am I really, I was starting to thinking I was going crazy because I've never experienced in my lifetime not being understood. That was one of the toughest things, that not to blame America at all, just to take responsibility that, well, it's not their fault they didn't understand you. Maybe you could have spent a little bit more time to change your language, something like that.
Just one more question: where could people find you online, or I don't know if you got your music posted in different places, but where could any of our listeners find you?
Most of my music is locked up in television and films, which has been wonderful because, if they play these programs for the rest of my life, I'm still getting paid. And most of my work as a producer has been producing other people's work, and in New Zealand, which was one of the difficulties I had in America, which was, okay, well, you're well known in New Zealand, you've done all these films, nobody knows you. Nobody's going to watch your shows so I've been one of these reluctant people to put my first album that I did, which is an album called Toto. Toto means blood, actually, in the Maori language. I think it's on Amazon or something. It got to the finals of the New Zealand Music Awards a number of years ago, and there's a couple of wonderful tracks on there I still love. But I think about some of that music now, and I just think how much you've grown and how much you've learned, and it's the thing about music, it constantly evolving and constantly changing.
Well, we can put in the show notes afterwards. When we're done, you can send over whatever links that you have to your music or anything else that you want to share.
Oh yeah. I'll give you there's a bunch of stuff on Bandmix that I put up there to. One last thing, Russ. One of the things I've never had a problem with is joining bands in America. With I played in a band. It was an Americana type band, and the whole idea of this band was to write all the music for a feature film and then go and tour with the film. And just got on majorly with the producer of that project. Then I got into another band, which was a tribute band to Leonard Skinner. And so I learned to play the bass on this Leonard Skinner music. And their whole repertoire was amazing, and that helped me to kind of get a feel for southern music. And now I also play in a Santana. I play guitar in a Santana band, and so I've never had a problem getting work that way. And more recently, I'll be performing with a guy whose name is Miguel de Hoyos, who's a well-renowned flamenco guitar player, and he, like, I don't pretend to even come anywhere near where he plays. But one of the things that Americans like is that, hey, this guy is, he may not have a natural sense of rhythm, but actually it's kind of cool to hear stuff that is slightly out of time or slightly incorrect, because we're all human. And once I accepted that as a musician, that sometimes I'm gonna make mistakes and sometimes I'm going to not sound as professional and as amazing as I wanted to. But in actual fact, sometimes I think even Carlos Santana said that, is, sometimes, the human heart is not a metronome. The human heart speeds up when it gets excited. It slows down when you're depressed. It flutters when you're in love, and I've always felt that music should be a little free flowing like that as well.
So you're basically saying that life doesn't need to be auto-tuned to be perfect.
Oh gosh, as a creative expression, go for it. As someone who just wants to not learn the craft and make a algorithm make you sound like someone else, not sure.
Well, that's a great metaphor, Rodger. Thanks so much, and I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, guys. It's I was kind of going, oh, well, where is this conversation going to go? And now, having listened to the depth of your questions and the sincerity of why you're asking me, because a lot of people, and I think about, gifted and talented people, and that sometimes just need to be encouraged and helped and edified. And if there's anything that's discussed on the show that helps that, man, it's just all great. Just all great.
Thank you, Rodger. We're grateful that you could join us for this hour, and good luck in all your future endeavors.
Thank you both. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Passion to Poison. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review. Also, tell your friends to subscribe as well.